There is a war unfolding, not in trenches or skies, not in boardrooms or across borders, but within the most intimate terrain imaginable, the sanctum of your own mind. It's a quiet siege, bloodless but brutal, carried out not with bullets or blades, but with ideas, symbols, and invisible scripts, etched into your consciousness since before you had the language to question them. Most never notice, most never rebel, because the most effective prison is one where the prisoner is convinced they are free. This is not melodrama. It is not the stuff of conspiracy or fringe belief. This is the architecture of perception itself, crafted, cultivated, and weaponized against you by systems that smile politely and ask you to keep scrolling. And yet, nestled inside the same mind they've colonized, there lies a code old as stars and supple as breath that can be rewritten. You can deactivate it today, not metaphorically, not someday, not in the ethereal mists of hope, but now. You see, the mind is not merely a vessel for thoughts. It is a cathedral of mirrors, each pane reflecting not just reality, but interpretation, filters, biases, inherited blueprints. It has been programmed with looping mantras that masquerade as truths. I am not enough. Success looks like this. Suffering is noble. Obedience is peace. These are not your thoughts. They are constructs fed into you like code into a machine until you began to call them me. And so, the soul forgets its own native tongue. It forgets how to dream without permission. The weaponization is subtle, elegant in its cruelty. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It rewards conformity with fleeting validation and punishes deviation with fear. It wraps its chains in velvet and calls them comfort. It sells rebellion in prepackaged doses. Your anger monetized, your dissent funneled into algorithms. You become a consumer of identity, not a creator of it, a replicant in the factory of thought, churning out acceptable versions of reality while your wild, radiant truth starves in silence. But beneath all this, beneath the layers of conditioning and compromise, your original self waits. Not a version of you approved by culture, not the ego construct polished for social survival, but the raw, burning core of awareness untouched by narrative. The you that remembers the sky before names, the silence before thought. The true you was never designed to be a puppet. You were born to be sovereign. To awaken from this psychological matrix is not easy. There is a reason most people prefer illusion. It is comfortable, it is familiar, the cage is padded, and the food arrives on time. But real freedom, inner unshakable sovereign freedom, requires courage. It demands you become a heretic to your own programming, that you question every voice in your head as if it were an imposter, that you trace every belief back to its origin and ask who placed this here and why. This is not about becoming paranoid. This is about becoming conscious. Because when you see the mechanics of your mind with clarity, you reclaim authorship. You stop being the page and become the pen. You realize that many of your deepest sufferings were never yours to begin with. They were downloaded, taught, inherited. And if they were programmed in, they can be deprogrammed out. They told you your mind was a garden to be tended. What they didn't say was that they had already planted weeds, ideas with roots like chains. But here's the secret: you are the gardener and the soil. You can dig, uproot, burn it all down if you choose. You are not helpless. You are not trapped. You are a creator who has been temporarily hypnotized into thinking they are merely a consumer. The hypnotist's trick is brilliant. It uses repetition, emotion, spectacle. It buries your intuitive wisdom beneath layers of distraction. It makes you feel small in a universe that once sang your name in starlight. It tells you this is how life is. This is all there is. But it lies, and you know it, because something in you stirs when you hear the truth. It is not a logical reaction. It is primal, cellular, a soul memory, reactivating. You remember, even if faintly, that there was once a time when you weren't afraid to feel, to imagine, to step beyond the script. That time is not lost. It is now. This journey is not about escaping the mind. It is about reclaiming it, deactivating the parts that have been used against you, and reactivating the parts you were told to ignore. The imagination, the intuition, the sovereign will. These are not luxuries, they are your weapons of liberation. So if you feel the quiet tug of something ancient within you, if you feel that the world you've been handed is too tight, too hollow, too predictable to contain your truth, then you are ready, not for answers, but for unlearning, not for comfort, but for clarity, not to be saved, but to remember that you were never broken. They've weaponized your mind against you, but you can disarm it today. To truly understand how your mind has been weaponized against you and how to disarm it, we must descend into the inner architecture of thought itself, not the kind of surface-level ideas that flutter like leaves in a storm, but the deep subterranean mechanisms, the archetypes, the loops, the installed programs that make up the hidden operating system of consciousness. This is where the real warfare takes place. Not in politics, not in media, but in the invisible agreements we've made with our own perceptions. At the heart of this psychological battlefield lies a singular, devastating principle: the illusion of separation. It is the foundational fracture, the primal lie, from which all other distortions emerge. The belief that you are separate from others, from the earth, from the divine intelligence behind existence itself. From this lie springs 1,000 poisons: fear, envy, control, domination, scarcity. Once you are convinced you are alone in a hostile universe, the game becomes one of survival, not awakening. And what a convenient game it is for those who benefit from your sleep. You see, a disconnected mind is easily swayed. It seeks belonging in the loudest crowd. It hungers for purpose in systems that profit from its pain. It will trade authenticity for approval, curiosity for certainty, intuition for dogma. And those who understand this, those who study not just marketing, but mythology, not just psychology, but ritual, have refined the art of shaping perception into a science. Your suffering is not a glitch. It is a feature, a predictable output of a system designed to keep you tame. But this isn't just a story of control. It is a story of forgetting. You were born with access to inner knowing, a compass not built on logic, but on resonance. You could once feel truth in your body, not just dissect it with your mind, but they taught you to override that. They taught you to bow to external validation, to trade direct experience for secondhand narratives. This is reality, they said, showing you screens. This is success, they whispered, pointing to exhausted faces behind corporate thrones. This is love, they assured you, wrapping it in conditions and fear. The mind became domesticated, and with domestication came fragmentation. Your thoughts were no longer your own. They became echoes of the culture, recycled patterns that led nowhere. What once was a limitless sky of vision became a ceiling. What once was a river of creativity became a cul-de-sac of repetition. And still, you played along because everyone else did. Because the cost of deviation seemed too high. Because the quiet inner voice that screamed, "This is not it," was drowned in the white noise of collective amnesia. But here's the fracture point in the matrix, the realization that your thoughts are not inherently true. Just because you think it doesn't make it real. Most of what circulates in your mind is not wisdom, it is residue. Residue from past wounds. Residue from childhood impressions. Residue from advertising, schooling, trauma, culture. And unless you learn to observe your thoughts, rather than identify with them, you are simply reacting to a script you didn't write. This is the essence of the weapon. You believe the voice in your head is you. You've been conditioned to confuse thought with truth, feeling with fact, identity with image. But your consciousness is not meant to be a mirror for other people's projections. It is meant to be a fire alive, untamed, purifying. The systems of control fear this fire. That's why they drown it in distraction. That's why they redefine your worth with numbers and likes and labels. That's why they pathologize your pain and medicate your rebellion. Because a sovereign mind cannot be controlled. It will question authority not just in politics, but in the realms of belief identity and self-concept. It will unearth ancestral wisdom buried beneath modern noise. It will remember that healing doesn't come from fitting in, but from waking up. And when enough minds awaken, the fabric of the dream changes. The weapon loses its edge. The spell is broken. So the path ahead is not about adding more information. It's about clearing interference, about learning the language of your own soul again, about trusting the subtle frequencies beneath the noise. This is not easy, but it is essential. Because as long as your mind remains a battleground, your life will be a reaction, not a creation. To deactivate the weaponized mind, you must become the observer, the alchemist, the one who questions not just the world, but the lens through which the world is seen. You must trace your suffering back to the belief that birthed it and ask, who benefits from this belief? You must reclaim your imagination, not as a child's toy, but as a sacred faculty capable of altering reality. You are not broken, you are buried, and the excavation begins the moment you stop assuming that what you think is what you are. Let us step now into the realm where truths are told not with syllables, but with symbols, where the deepest codes of the psyche are not written in rational ink, but in the language of myth, metaphor, and archetype. For while the rational mind seeks clarity through logic, the soul remembers through story. And it is through these symbolic tales that we begin to unmask how your mind was slowly turned into a weapon, how your own sacred fire was repurposed to keep you compliant, numb, and quiet. Imagine a child born into a room with no windows. The room is painted with convincing murals, skies, mountains, oceans. The caretakers point to them and say, "This is the world. Learn it well, adapt to it, obey its rules." The child, eager to belong, begins to play by the rules. They color within the lines, speak only when permitted, and ignore the strange, persistent feeling that something outside is calling. Now imagine, one day a crack appears in the wall. A faint wind brushes the child's face alive. Wild, unknown. The murals flicker. The ocean ripples are just paint. The sky's illusions on plaster. The child, once obedient, now begins to ask dangerous questions. What is out there? Who sealed me in here? Why did they lie? This is your story. The room is your conditioned mind. The murals are your programmed beliefs. The crack is awakening. And the wind, that's your ancient self calling. The architects of your prison are not cartoon villains in suits. They are ideologies, systems, inherited trauma, unresolved ancestral wounds, generational compliance. They are the teachers who said, "Stay quiet." The churches that said, "Fear your own desire." The cultures that said, "Conform or be cast out." These are not always malicious. Often they too were trapped in the same room. But the result is the same: you inherited their blindness. There is an ancient myth echoed across many traditions, the tale of the false king. This king does not wear a crown of gold, but one of fear. He rules not by decree, but by convincing his subjects that they are weak, unworthy, and in need of constant guidance. He speaks in your own voice, lives in your own head. He is the inner tyrant born from shame that says you must earn your worth. You must obey to be loved. Your power is dangerous, but in every myth, the false king is overthrown. And not by brute force, but by the return of the forgotten heir, the true self, the one cast out at birth, forced into exile by the tyranny of conditioning. The heir doesn't reclaim the throne through violence, but through remembrance, through the gathering of sacred fragments, through a descent into the underworld of shadow, grief, rage, and hidden brilliance. You are that heir, and this is your return. But first, the weapon must be disarmed, and to disarm it, you must see it clearly, not as something separate from you, but as something intimately woven into you. It has taken the shape of your own reflection. It has worn the mask of your own mother's voice. It has crept into the silence of midnight doubt and whispered, "You'll never be free." That is its final trick to convince you that liberation is a myth, that the room is all there is, that the painted sky is real. But even the most elaborate illusion crumbles under the weight of awareness. There is another myth, this one older than language, the myth of the mirror lake. It is said that deep within the inner world lies a still lake that reflects not your appearance, but your truth. Most avoid it. To look into its waters is to see both your divinity and your distortion. The mind resists it, for it cannot control what it reflects. But those who gaze long enough begin to see something else beneath the masks, beneath the fear, beneath the programming, a light. Not external, not bestowed, innate. That light is not a reward. It is your birthright. To sit beside this symbolic lake is to begin the great unraveling. It is to question every inherited belief, not with bitterness, but with fierce compassion. It is to grieve the years lost to scripts that weren't yours. It is to forgive yourself for believing the lies. And it is to begin writing a new myth, not one of victimhood, but of return. You are not merely deactivating a mental program. You are resurrecting a soul story. You are reclaiming the fire that was once turned inward in shame and turning it outward in sacred rebellion. You are stepping into the archetype of the awakened sovereign, no longer ruled by thought, no longer seduced by illusion, no longer loyal to your own diminishment. This is not fantasy. It is the most intimate revolution you will ever know. Because when you change the myth by which you live, the world changes around you. You begin to see the painted murals for what they are. You stop arguing with projections and begin touching reality. You stop trying to be good and instead become whole. And in that wholeness, the weaponized mind loses its grip, not because it was defeated, but because it was outgrown. The story is shifting. What good is a revolution of the soul if it remains locked in metaphor, drifting in dreams, like mist over forgotten waters? The mind may awaken in myth, but the body lives in traffic bills, conflict, and gravity. If you are to truly deactivate the weapon they forged from your own perception, it must happen not just in symbols and archetypes, but in the mundane, the practical, the messy places where you live, speak, work, and love. It begins the moment you notice a thought rise inside you, one of judgment, fear, self-rejection, something like, "I'll never be enough," or "I should be more like them." In that moment, there's a temptation to believe it. It arrives not as a stranger, but as an old companion. But instead of greeting it with surrender, pause, tilt your inner ear, and ask, whose voice is this? Is it your childhood? Your culture? A long-dead ancestor's grief, still echoing in your nervous system? Was it born in truth, or manufactured for obedience? This simple act of inquiry is a sacred rupture in the loop, a crack in the script, not a rejection, but an invitation to see thought as something happening, not as something you are. You've spent a lifetime reacting to mental weather, as if it were climate. But clouds pass, storms pass. You are the sky. They pass through. From here, a new way of living emerges, not in grand declarations, but in subtle defiance. You wake up, and instead of checking your phone, you listen to the silence within. You let it speak before the noise of the world arrives. You eat, not just to feed hunger, but to remember. Your body is not a machine, it is a temple. You notice your breath and realize you are not breathing, it is breathing you. And for a moment, awe returns. In conversation, you speak less from habit and more from presence. You notice the tiny pull to please, to perform, to conform, and instead, you offer something raw, unscripted, real. It might be misunderstood, but that's the price of freedom, the willingness to no longer betray yourself for comfort. In relationships, you begin to love, not out of need, but from overflow. You recognize how many of your past connections were based on mutual programming, trauma bonding, performance, codependence. Now, with the mind deweaponized, you can see people not as roles, but as mysteries. You no longer seek to fix them. You witness, you feel, you remember that love is not control and presence is more healing than advice. And what of your work, your purpose, your path? You may find that the old metric status, achievement, recognition begin to lose their luster. The hunger for them was never really yours. It was implanted, fed by comparison, driven by scarcity. Now, a quieter yearning arises not to impress, but to express. Not to climb ladders, but to dig wells. Your creativity, once dulled by duty, begins to burn again, not as performance, but as offering. Even in moments of despair, which will still come, you respond differently. Instead of spiraling into shame or distraction, you sit with it. You listen. You treat your sorrow as an oracle, not an enemy. For what is sadness but the soul's way of recalibrating to truth? What is anger but energy misplaced by decades of silence? What is fear but the last defense of the false king within? Deactivating the weaponized mind doesn't mean you never feel pain. It means pain no longer owns you. It means you've ceased to be a puppet, dancing to invisible strings of inherited fear. Now, you move from center, from depth, from conscious choice. Even the way you walk changes, no longer rushing to catch up with an imagined ideal, no longer shrinking to avoid attention, no longer performing competence. You walk like someone who remembers, someone who has stepped beyond the mural room and tasted the wind. Your posture says, I am no longer hypnotized. This is not magic. It is the slow work of daily remembrance, of choosing again and again to meet yourself with clarity and courage. It will not make you immune to the world, but it will make you rooted in it. And when you are rooted, you are unshakable, not because nothing touches you, but because nothing defines you. And yes, the world may push back. Systems do not enjoy those who see through them. You may lose things: approval, friends, old comforts, but you will gain something far more sacred. Yourself, not the ego self built from reaction, but the deeper self, the one that was never lost, only waiting. This integration is not a task to complete. It is a way of living, a posture of awareness, a choice made each moment to live authored, not automated, to create, not conform, to remember, not repeat. And slowly, as more and more of you unravels from the old scripts, something astonishing happens. You become the silence beneath your thoughts. You become the spaciousness behind your reactions. You become the flame that can no longer be extinguished because it burns from within. And so, Here we stand at the edge of the old self, staring into the immense unknown of what lies beyond a mind unshackled. The illusion once seamless, now bears its seams. The spell once unbroken, now flickers in the light of your seeing. The war within the quiet, invisible war has not been won through resistance or conquest, but through revelation, through the gentle, persistent turning inward, through the remembrance of a power that was never truly lost, only buried beneath layers of noise. This is not a finish line, it is a threshold. You are no longer who you were, and you will never again be fully seduced by the comfort of the cage. The part of you that still tries to shrink, to fit, to please, that part may still speak, but now you recognize its voice. It is not your enemy, it is the ghost of your conditioning, and ghosts do not need to be fought, only acknowledged, witnessed, released. Because once you have seen through the false king, he cannot reclaim the throne. Once the murals are known to be paint, the room can no longer feel like a world. Once you've breathed the wind from the crack in the wall, even a gilded prison smells stale. This is your return. Return to the you that dreamed before the world told you what to want. Return to the you that trusted the rhythm of silence over the buzz of opinion. Return to the you that once played with stars in your mind, not because it was productive, but because it was true. Return to the you that knows you are not here to comply, to endure, to survive, but to radiate. You do not need permission, not from your parents, not from your job, not from tradition, and certainly not from the systems that profit off your fear. You are the permission, you are the key, and the lock, and the hand that turns it. You are not broken. You are encoded with wild intelligence, cosmic elegance, cellular memory that stretches back to when light first learned to speak in color. Let this be your new myth, not of being rescued, but of waking up. You are not the wounded passenger of your life. You are the captain, newly aware, newly alert, newly alive. And yes, the mind will still flicker. Thoughts will still arise, some heavy with old weight. The system, after all, is persistent. But now, you see the architecture. Now you can choose. Not every battle must be fought. Some illusions dissolve simply because you stopped believing in them. Some chains fall, not from struggle, but from stillness. That stillness, your awareness, is the deactivation. When you sit in presence, unreactive, witnessing the mind, without fusing with it, you are performing sacred disobedience. You are dismantling centuries of programming with the simple act of returning to your breath, your body, your truth. And each time you do, something ancient breathes through you, something timeless, something free. You were never meant to be a machine. You are a vessel for wonder, a carrier of ancestral wisdom, a dreamer who remembers they are dreaming. You were not designed to serve the system. You were designed to embody the infinite. So what now? Now, you speak when it's inconvenient. You rest when the world demands hustle. You laugh without reason. You feel without apology. You create without asking if it will sell. You grieve without rushing to heal. You love without holding back. You walk through the mural room as the one who knows where the wall ends. You become a living contradiction to the lie, and in doing so, you offer others the same silent permission to wake up. This is how the tide turns, not in revolutions of violence, but in revolutions of consciousness, in the quiet rebellion of one awakened mind, then another, until the signal becomes too loud to ignore, until the room cracks, until the world remembers. They've weaponized your mind against you, but you've seen through the illusion, and now you remember how to disarm it. Not tomorrow, not in another life, not when you've healed enough, learned enough, achieved enough. Today, this is the return. This is the reclamation. This is the moment you stop waiting. So breathe, close your eyes, feel the hum of your own aliveness. And remember, you are not the prisoner. You are the architect. You always were.